We used to do this show in the past. We used to do it. It was Front Office View. And then we took a little bit of a break away, but now it's time for a family reunion, baby. We're going to talk all things New York Jets, predict the 2024 offseason from a former NFL general manager's perspective. Let's go. Zoinks! It is unequivocally the Super Bowl for New York Jet fans. Field Yates, baby. Field gosh darn Yates. Let's bring him on the show. Come on, people. Connor Rodgers is joining the show. What's up, Connor? But Trevor gosh darn Sycamore, baby. For me, personally, my favorite New York Jet of all time.
Wow, it's great to be on. What an intro that was right there.
Paul, nobody does an intro like you, man.
Paul, you give the best intro of literally any podcast that I've ever been.
I'm gonna lose my gosh darn bananas. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Weston Jr., a.k.a. Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. We got a special episode today. Again, it's the family reunion of Front Office View that you didn't know you needed. Well, it's back, baby. Paul Esden Jr. here, Boy Green. We have Randy Mueller, former NFL general manager and executive of the year, gracing us with his presence. Let's go, Randy. Good afternoon, buddy.
Hey, Paul, you bring a smile to my face, man. You're the best. It's good to be back with you.
So what we'll attempt to do on today's show is predict some things from a GM's perspective on some things that could be happening. But before we get there, I kind of want your take on some of the things that have already happened. I mean, there's a lot of craziness in the NFL coaching carousel. We just saw earlier today, we're streaming live right now, but we saw earlier today, Pete Carroll surprisingly out in Seattle as a head coach. He'll be ascending to some other position within the front office. But, Mike Vrabel and all the other openings that are available. Some people thought maybe the Jets would join that party, but Woody Johnson says we're going to run this entire operation back. I ask you, Randy, was that the right move?
Well, I give Woody credit. He's got faith and he's sticking to his plan. I think a lot of us would have probably chosen a different route, but he sees it a little different. I don't know if it's the right move or not, Paul. I haven't seen enough evidence to say, hey, we want to continue to head down this track. I know, and you follow it every day, but I know the defense is better. The offense is atrocious still. I'm not one of those guys that just blames the quarterback and says, hey, we'll get a new quarterback. We're going to turn the page. Time will tell. It's a hard one. I felt it ironic that they're playing against the Patriots to end their season, and all the talks about Bill Belichick not being around, but yet nobody ever talked about Robert Saleh and his position. So there was just something fundamentally wrong with that conversation. That's all.
Yeah, that's true. Bill Belichick, the greatest coach of all time. When are we getting this old man out of here? And then Saleh's over there on the other side, like looking around,
winking, looking around, celebrating, happy to break a 15-game losing streak.
Yeah, that's right. Dating all the way back to 2015, and that was the first time the Jets beat the Patriots in Foxborough in a regular season game since 2008. Brett Favre was the quarterback for the New York Jets. Crazy. So, a little bit wild. Randy, if I remember correctly, didn't you interview for the New York Jets general manager position at one point? When was that? What year was that?
Yeah, many moons back. It was the job that Mike McCagnon got. So whenever McCagnon, because that was when I remember Charlie Casserly was involved in that process. And that's where the interest in me came from. Charlie and I were contemporaries way back when. So that's when I did get a chance to meet with them, Woody, his lawyers, all the people involved. So that seems like an eternity ago, believe it or not.
So you have the reason why I ask is, first off, it's interesting for the Jets and your very prominent background and accolades and history and everything that you did. You have an inside to Woody Johnson. A lot of Jet fans that sometimes don't really know what Woody's all about. What was during that interview process where you spoke with Woody and apparently a bunch of people within the Jets organization? What was kind of your take on Woody, or what did you know about him even heading into that?
Well, I didn't know much about him. I spent, I guess, 3 or 4 hours at his office downtown, and it was very interesting because he was very engaged. He's obviously a personable guy, easy to talk to. He's the kind of guy you'd want to go have a beer with at the bar for sure. That's just the way his demeanor is. I don't know his brother at all, but I enjoyed my time with him. I think the questions, the information they were trying to glean from me was probably more of a let's pick this guy's brain than actually, hey, he's a serious candidate at that point, because I think they kind of knew what they wanted to do. And obviously, with Charlie Casserly being involved, Mike McCagnon was his protege with the Texans. So I think we all knew where it was headed, but I enjoyed it and I was impressed with Woody. Woody's loyal, and it may be to a fault, but as you're finding out, he's very loyal, and it's easy to see where you stand with him. And I think there's some genuine sincerity with why those guys that are running the Jets now feel so comfortable.
I'm curious, did you know that going in, that you had an inkling that they already had their guy and this wasn't an interview that you considered serious? Or in the middle of it, did something click like, okay, I see what's happening here?
No, I had been around a while, and I'd kind of seen how these things were dictated. I was the senior advisor for the Chargers at that time, who was at the exact same time going through a hiring of their own GM. So I've been through a few rodeos, Paul. It wasn't my first one, so I kind of knew where it was headed, but I enjoyed the conversation and thought, hey, I'm going to learn something from this as well. So it was well worth my time, and hopefully it was theirs.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask you, because nowadays, I know these are different conversations, but the Rudy Rule, that some people get insulted that they're only doing the interview process, and they realize going in that it's only to either check off a box, or in this case, perhaps pick your brain, and that could rub some people the wrong way. But it seems like you had kind of a positive spin to it, that I'm going to take, not every day someone gets interviewed for a general manager position. It seemed like you really went out of your way to make the most of it.
Yeah, without a doubt. I would never be put off by the fact that someone wants to talk to you for whatever reason. So yeah, and I agree, I concur. I think some of the guys who do have these jobs or get these opportunities to interview for these jobs see it as a bit of a burden and an unfair process. But at the same time, you have a chance in your 3 or 4 hours to sway the jury, so to speak. So I would look at it as a great opportunity to further my chances and further my own personal agenda to, hey, this is going to make me better. I'm going to learn something today, and hopefully the people that are interviewing me are going to learn something as well. And you never know when paths may cross again. So just because you're not getting the job this time around, there may be other opportunities down the road. So I always entered into it with the glasses half full type philosophy.
I was always fascinated to get those stories. We did all those wonderful front office view episodes, and I wish there was 1,000 more. And that's like the only show I did for the rest of my life. That's how much I really enjoyed and took out of all of those. So it's good. I've always wanted to hear some of those stories. We'll have to dive into those even deeper in the future, perhaps. But I want to present you a couple of the scenarios that the Jets have to make a decision on this offseason. Perhaps none greater than Bryce Huff, who at now that the season is complete in his contract year, so to speak, he was playing on the 1-year restricted free agent tender. It was a second round tender for $4.3 million. He ended up getting 10 sacks from undrafted free agent. It wasn't even selected in the draft, to getting 10 sacks with the Jets this year. And now the 25-year-old, so young, is headed for unrestricted free agency. Randy, I don't know if you could put a proper dollar amount on it, but what is the market value of Bryce Huff? Because people are debating. They look at the snap percentages. He's a guy that doesn't play a lot of snaps, sort of a pass rush specialist, if you were to label him or put a category on him. But then when you see the 10 sacks and you see the limited amount of sacks, a lot of people would say, if we increase snap percentage, sack production would go up. Okay, that's where we're going here. So what is the market value of a guy like Bryce Huff heading into free agency?
Well, I think it's all in the eyes of the beholder, right? You don't need a whole bunch of teams to compete to drive the price up. I've heard and seen some of the cap analysis done on him, in that the profile isn't complete because of the lack of play time. I got news for you. NFL teams aren't looking to build a profile. That may be done in a lab coat somewhere, but they're looking to improve their pass rush. And teams are going to look at the tape, just like I did, and say, this kid can rush the passer. Let's find a way to use him as much as we can. Shoot, 70% of the game now is played in sub personnel groupings. So we're always rushing the passer. So his skill set is coveted. Now, whether the whole profile of everything that fits with paying a guy franchise money is there, I don't think that's going to discourage people. I don't think they're going to have any problem connecting dots if you're a GM somewhere else. So I think he'll have a really robust market. I think the Jets will be hard pressed to be able to match what I think he's going to get.
Yeah, and I think an intriguing part of this process, and not enough people are doing, is Aaron Rodgers went down 4 snaps into the year, so the Jets did not play with many leads in this season.
Right.
Heck, they
Mhm.
didn't have many at all. Again, they only had a handful of wins on the season. But if
Right.
Bryce Huff was able to generate 10 sacks with his snap totals, playing mostly at even or at worst case, as it was for a lot of the Jets season, down points and facing less pass rushing opportunities, again, that's another thing where you start to say, if we stretch this to playing with leads, how many more sacks could he have gotten? How much more quality in terms of the efficiency he could have gotten from a pass rush perspective? So I feel like that's another factor in this for another team that may be considering Bryce Huff's services. Are like, yeah, he did that over here, but over here
Right.
with us, he could do, B, C, D, E. I imagine that's a big part of the free agency process in general for general managers.
It's a giant part of the conversation internally in a bunch of buildings right now because everybody seems like they always are looking to increase their pass rush. I could name a dozen teams right now that could use a skill set. I guess the downside to that kind of a discussion is he apt to not be as durable? Is he apt to not be as effective if he's leaning on people and having to play the run more so than he did with the Jets? I would tend to put a value on him of just being a sub rusher and don't try to reinvent the wheel, right? Don't put him out there on first downs a lot of time because that is when we're facing running schemes for the most part. I don't even think that should enter in. I think we got to view him as a pass rusher, put a value on it, and understand that 70% of the snaps is where you're going to get his optimum effort and impact, and value what that's worth. I think it's going to be worth a lot of money. It may not be worth franchise defensive end money, but it's going to be close to it because rushing the passer is prevalent throughout the league and nobody has enough.
Yeah, that's going to be a big question because the franchise tag number, they are still to be determined. Obviously, they alter on a year-to-year basis, but the number last year was hovering around for what would be for Bryce Huff, hovering around $20 million on a one-year deal for Huff. Is he someone that, again, the Jets said, Joe Douglas, when he had his end-of-season press conference as general manager of the Jets, was asked, hey, would you franchise tag Bryce Huff? Would you consider? He said, we're not there yet. Randy, I throw the ball over to your court. Again, assuming that the franchise tag is in that ballpark, again, it's unofficial, but $20-ish million. Would you hesitate putting that on Bryce Huff to restrict him from getting to the open market?
Well, it depends what their other options are. I don't know their other options like you do, Paul, but I would not want to lose good players under any circumstance. And if it were a one-year deal, I might find a way to make sure we can have 20 million available. That's the hard part is I think the Jets only have, according to my numbers, around 12 million available for next year. You chart the downside of a franchise tag is it counts fully against the cap all in 1 year. So a $20 million tag being used is 20 million in cap space you have to have. You don't get a chance to reduce that. You can't restructure that. That is what it is. So that may preclude them from being able to pay that kind of money. If you were going to do that, I think the Bryce Huff is more interested in the amount of guarantees I'm going to get for the length of the term. And at age 25, position myself for another bite at the apple in 3 or 4 years. So if he can go somewhere, ideally make his 16 to maybe 18 million, get a giant guarantee, get 2 years of guarantees, get 20 million times 2 in guarantees. Then all of a sudden the franchise tag isn't, the optimal choice for anybody. And maybe the Jets can do that. Maybe they can find a way to guarantee him a couple years of franchise tags without having to use it and then get cap numbers they can deal with these first couple years. A lot of ways to kind of model your cap and his particular needs per se.
Yeah, and adding another element to what you just said, just so our fans can understand, when a team decides to place the franchise tag on a player, whether they sign it or not, they must have that amount of money available for the cap. So to your point, your numbers that you have where the Jets are technically right now, they couldn't afford it. If they place the tag, and again, there's still a few months to go, they would have to have that money available, put to the side, and account for that on the cap, which is another part of the equation. Again, whether he signs it or not at that moment in time, the moment you do it, booyah, you got to have that money available. That's a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, definitely. And there's not a lot of teams that have 20 million just laying around that they can throw on one guy. So
yeah,
it's a struggle for a lot of teams. I think anybody would rather plan their caps out, go ahead and make a traditional structure in a deal where you can manipulate the cap to the point where it makes sense and then have the player as well. That's the best of both worlds for the team.
Yeah, and Randy, I've said this, but it's easy from my chair over here on the couch, grabbing a couple of popcorn kernels, throwing them in my mouth for the Bryce Huff thing. But I've said that no matter what the Jets do, if they want to keep him and retain him long term or what have you, you have to put the franchise tag on him, because if you put the franchise tag on him, you control the conversation. Even if you're going to tag and trade him, which is a possibility, because I imagine a lot of teams would be interested, and then allow another team to negotiate that deal as potentially a part of the trade. If you just let him go on the open market, the best you could do is comp picks in the future, and that doesn't help the Jets, who believe that they're an all-in team right now. So I've advocated, I've slammed the table, no matter what scenario you choose, whether you plan on keeping him or trading him away, you must franchise tag him to control that part of the conversation and that narrative. What's your thoughts on that, Randy?
Well, that does sound good, but I don't know their other plans. They've got to do some other things to the other side of the ball, this just in, to make that side better as well. So it is all about options, and it does sound good if you're going to evaluate the situation on a one-off basis. But that price tag is exorbitant, and like you said, it's 20 million in cap room that we can't use to do anything else with our team. So the idea of the franchise tag was not to tag and trade people. I know it has happened occasionally, but there are some hoops you have to jump through to make that worthwhile. And I don't know that the Jets are to that position where they can put the rest of their team building on the shelf and figure out the Huff deal. So, we'll see. I don't know what their other options are. Like I said, you might know their roster better than I do. I know his skill set works about anywhere, but they may have other options. It is a good defense, and they find ways to produce pressures without an individual making 10 sacks. So a lot of ways to look at it. That's for sure.
Yeah, the additional complicated piece of the puzzle, if you want to call it complicated, is the Jets used the number 15 overall pick on Will McDonald. And he played, and I hate that this is a fact, but he played the fewest amount of snaps for a first-round pick by the Jets since, check notes, Vernon Golston. And that is the worst Jets draft bust in franchise history. So, but we knew that was the plan when they invested that with all the other defensive linemen. So the Jets, in the back of their heads, may say, hey, Huff leaves Will McDonald, our first round pick that we invested in. He's the one who could take over that snap. So perhaps they already have that plan figured out. But Randy, let's assume that they figure out this tag and trade thing, that they want to do it. I ask you, what is the value of a 25-year-old dynamic pass rusher coming off a double-digit sack year that you trade to someone else? But of course, that other team, unless they're crazy, would probably want to negotiate that deal as part of the trade, not to give the power all to the player, because they trade a bunch of assets and Huff ends up on another team. He would hold control as they head into the future. So with that being said, and there's a lot of factoids in that, what do you believe the Jets could get from a Bryce Huff tag and trade? A second, first? What could be possible if you had to prognosticate?
I would say because his body of work is somewhat limited, and because he is a certain percentage of the plays guy at this point, you're going to get less than a first round pick. I would think the comp would be that the what the Commanders did with their defensive end that they traded to the Bears for a second
Montez
round
Sweat.
pick. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I would think that's a fair amount you could ask for. I think they could probably get a second round pick. And you're right. Somebody's going to want to extend him the minute they get him, because they're not going to want to take on the $20 million franchise tag number either, unless it's just for 24 hours. And usually that's the way those deals work. You take on the tag, but you already have another deal in your pocket to renegotiate it and get it at a lower cap number. So I would think that's fair. The Leonard Williams to Seattle, a second or third round pick, somewhere in there. I think there's a lot of hoops that have to happen to get that. And even though that sounds very enticing, the comp pick where he goes somewhere else and that third round pick comes back to you a year later isn't out of the question either. There's reasons to do that one as well.
All right, let me use this to leap into the next conversation. There's another offseason topic for the Jets. Davante Adams, whether, Aaron Rodgers wants Davante. Davante has had some flirtations with the Jets on social media and everything that includes. Let me throw this at you before we even really fully dive into the Davante Adams thing. Is this possible? Bryce Huff tag and trade straight up for Davante Adams. It's weird because Huff is 25 and not nearly as proven as Davante, but Davante's 31, and who knows the next direction of that franchise. Could that make sense? That is floated around on Jets social media as a possible option. Throw all the draft picks out of it to acquire Davante. That player for player. Could that be possible?
That sounds kind of far-fetched, Paul. I'll be honest with you. It sounds like that plan was hatched on Fantasy Football 101. and people have kind of ran with that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I don't know how that would take some of my pea brain to have to sort out before I say yay or nay to it. I
Okay.
don't think it would make a lot of sense for the Jets to do it, for one thing. I don't think
Mhm.
the Jets are going to build their team with a bunch of receivers unless they find a way to protect the quarterback and do some things better in the running game. It doesn't matter who their receivers are. So I think there's some priorities that have to take place. The complete opposite of re-engineering that deal was what the Raiders did to acquire Davante Adams. They acquired him 2 years ago from the Packers as a bell and whistle receiver when they never solidified their offensive line. And look where they're at now. So the Raiders did that. It didn't work. Now we're asking another team to do the same. And I just don't know that the Jets are a receiver away from making a run. So that wouldn't make a lot of sense to me from a football standpoint.
Yeah, let's get into the Davante Adams trade. So when the Raiders initially acquired him, they gave up a first and a second round pick. The Raiders were picking in the 20s at that point is what it was. And then it was a 50s pick for the first and second round pick to the Packers. Now Davante Adams is older, obviously, than he was 2 years ago with the Green Bay Packers. So what is the value of Davante Adams now if he gets traded? He's 31 years of age and he has 3 years left on that $140 million contract that he signed as part of the trade to the Raiders. What would be his value if another team was to trade for him? What would it cost?
If I were looking to fill a need at receiver, I would probably offer them less than people would think. I would think it would be a second round pick that maybe could go to a first if he meets some thresholds along the way. So it would be a conditional type stair stepping of the compensation. 31 years old is what it is. You know, depending on who's going to end up running the Raiders franchise, that
Sure.
may be of some merit to them to consider. I don't know that they're ready to make a run for that. Again, this team and most teams are going to try to fortify that offensive line first before they add a receiver. But maybe there's a case that Davante Adams could go somewhere else for that kind of compensation for that package, for that whole package. Maybe it's some lesser second round picks, then a second round pick as well. I don't think you can get a first round pick for Davante Adams at this point. I really don't.
Interesting. Again, we're speaking with Randy friggin' Mueller, everybody, former NFL general manager. You see it down there, the athletic football GM. He's doing all kinds of wonderful, amazing things, and make sure you guys support him on all those different ventures. I know we've had some, I'm trying to think of the right adjective here, thrilling conversations about Zach Wilson during his time here with the New York Jets. And it seems like Aaron Rodgers and Joe Douglas were talking about Zach Wilson in the past tense during this press conference, which seemed a little weird because technically he's under contract for 2024 at least, plus the fifth-year option for 2025. It seems like a foregone conclusion based on everything we've been hearing around here that he will be traded. Do you believe he can be traded? Well, what is the value for Zach Wilson, who, like I said, still has one more year left on his rookie contract at least, plus a team acquiring him would have to make that decision in May whether to exercise or decline that fifth-year option on his deal. What's the value for Zach Wilson?
Well, a couple things. One, I do think the ship has sailed. I think it's time for Zach, and he would be the first to probably acknowledge and applaud it. I think it is time to move on. I do think there'll be a market for him, not necessarily as a starter, but I think there will be several teams that inquire and kick the tires. To that end, I think they could probably get a fifth-round pick for him, a mid-round pick in some capacity for him. I think here's why. I think most teams on the outside, and this is not going to make Jet fans happy, and I'm not picking on you guys, Paul. I'm just saying most of the other NFL teams, they'll put some blame on Zach. They'll put more blame on the Jet system, the offense, and the positions that they've put him in. So I don't think it's all going to come back to haunt him as he can't play. End of story. Gavel hits the table. I think there's going to be a convoluted, not an excuse, but there's going to be a convoluted discussion as to who should be blamed most. Obviously, he has physical talent. He can make throws. We saw that in flashes. We just never saw a system that was sustainable that really gave this kid a chance. So I think a lot of teams are going to say, hey, I'd kick the tires on that because of that, and I'm not going to put all the blame on Zach. So I don't know if that answers it, but I think there will be a few teams, maybe it's only a couple, that offer up a mid-round choice if that's what they want to do.
And what's the proper place? Because, like in my head, I've tried to speculate on teams that would make sense. And a team that jumped out in my head was the Kansas City Chiefs, because Andy Reid is another former BYU guy. Patrick Mahomes is obviously the clear and established starter. There'd be no spotlight or anything on Zach Wilson, and he'd be the guy developing behind and just biding his time for whether to be traded again in the future if he had some of that Andy Reid magic sprinkled on him, or perhaps an injury happens and he steps in and makes some things happen. So Chiefs is the first one that came to my head randomly, but are there teams that make sense that you think would be a good fit for Zach to potentially trade for him this offseason?
Well, I think some place that has the idea in mind of what the Jets did, where he can go learn from a veteran. I think a place like the Rams and Sean McVay could pose a good landing spot for him. We see 6 teams now looking for coaches, and I don't even know if that counts Pete Carroll, so that may be 7. And so let's see where the dust settles with some of these coaching hires. He might make some sense depending on the offensive systems that these places run. But I think ideally, if he could go somewhere with a veteran established guy and sit and learn, and it's a legitimate offense that he can learn, and a legitimate offensive coach and scheme, I think there will be a few landing spots. I really do. And I think there's enough veteran quarterbacks in backup positions that are up in the air going forward that it might make some sense for. And again, I agree with you. I think the Chiefs might make some sense. I think the Rams could make some sense. I think a place like Seattle would make some sense because Drew Lock is not the long-term there, and they don't have, we all know what Geno is. So depending on who they hire as a coach, that could be a fallback option as well. I think there'll be some opportunities for teams looking for backup quarterbacks. There always is.
Well, Randy, it's almost like you do this for a living, and that's exactly where we need to go. The Jets' backup quarterback situation, it was an absolute disaster. They started 4 different guys the first time they've done that since 1989. And again, everyone's hoping Aaron Rodgers is healthy next year, God willing. But just in case he isn't, the Jets seem to be, Joe Douglas categorized it as a high possibility that the Jets are going to acquire a veteran quarterback this offseason. And as I look at the list, there's a lot of names on the list that are set to be free agents, from Ryan Tannehill, Jacoby Brissett, Tyrod Taylor, Jameis Winston, Drew Lock, as you just mentioned, is a guy, Gardner Minshew, and there's so many others, Joshua Dobbs, and the list goes on of veteran quarterbacks that are going to be available this offseason. It seems like that will be an aggressive point for the Jets to lock that in for a QB2 behind Rodgers. Do you have a preference of all the veteran quarterbacks out there that the Jets could move in on? It seems like the entire league, for that matter, over 65 or 66 quarterbacks ended up being used this year because of all the injuries. So the Jets won't be alone in their pursuits, but is there one that stands out to you that potentially could make sense?
Well, the guys with the most body of work, probably that, would be easiest to get a consensus on are the Gardner Minshews of the world. By the way, how would Mike White fit in with that group that played this week or this year? You think he would have fit in okay too? Yeah. I think he's probably happiest of all, Paul. He's in the sunshine collecting his checks and not going through what we found those Jet quarterbacks to have to endure this year. So I don't know. I mean, there's going to be people available. I think it's not going to be a preferred choice for any of those guys just because of the history of the last couple of years. And now Aaron and how that's going to go. So I don't know how preferred it will be. Now, when the music stops, there's going to be plenty of opportunity, plenty of bodies for them to fill it. Let's see if they can evaluate to find the right guy to fit the bill. I don't know.
Yeah, it will be interesting because I was kind of thinking that myself on the backup quarterback thing. What attracts a guy who's coming in clearly being the backup? Because that's Aaron Rodgers. Like, okay, I'm not coming in to compete. I'm clearly being the backup. I'm curious what goes through the backup quarterback's head as they're evaluating. Is it a pile of money? I'm sure the Jets would offer that, and so would a lot of teams potentially. Or right. I'll take a little less because here Gardner Minshew is a good example. He signed. They end up drafting a kid in the top 5. Top 5 gets hurt, but he kind of said, all right, I'll be kind of competing. I'm sure that's what the team told him, competes and ends up losing. So I'm kind of curious what goes through the backup quarterback's mind as priorities, as opposed to another position where you're evaluating everything else as a guaranteed starter and things of that nature. That part is fascinating.
I would say a couple of things. One is stability. The franchise has to have some stability. Another one would be familiarity with the scheme, the system, and maybe a coach or two on offense. Those are things that I would look at. And then can I reestablish myself to where there's a little bit of upside here? So those would be things that, might not be top of the list to go to the Jets. I don't know. I mean, maybe if Aaron Rodgers were to get hurt, somebody else would get a chance. But those would be the things that would be on my mind: is franchise stability, offensive familiarity with a scheme that has proven to kind of elevate QB's play. And then just the fact that, where do I want to be? Locale, geographics, all of that stuff that might enter in as well. So there's some criteria that fluctuates depending on who you're talking about. Money obviously enters in, though, like you mentioned. Money can buy your best friends, Paul, if you're willing to hand it out. That's for sure.
It's funny that we hear these declarative statements like Jonathan Taylor. He had some issues with the Colts, and then there's reporters that come out, great, widely respected reporters. He reports to the world that say it's over. They're never coming back together. They're moving on. I'm like, oh, okay, that's sad. And then all of a sudden, a pile of money. Excuse me? Yeah, I'm here long term. I'm like, okay, I guess money fixed that problem pretty quick. That's
funny how that works. Yeah.
That was it. So let me go to another guy. Very polarizing in Jets land. Mekhi Becton. The Jets declined his 5th-year option, so he's set to be a free agent. Performance-wise, first half of the year, okay, encouraging. Second half of the year, not so much. Allowing 17 sacks this year. Not great whatsoever. But the good thing that Mekhi Becton finally checked off the bucket list was the appearance. He appeared in 16 of 17 games so far this or ended up this season. He only missed the one that was on the Black Friday, which was a short week. So Mekhi played in the most games he ever has before. Of course, that was in a contract year. If you're the Jets, do you bring him back? While it was somewhat questionable, maybe he's going to face the same thing with the Jets as everybody else, a 1-year prove-it deal to see if last year was an outlier or not, and whether or not the Jets would kick the tires or just say, this is a first-round pick that really didn't work out. We're going to wash our hands and move on.
I just don't think you can answer it quite that cut and dried. I think it's all about options for the player and for the team. So I would not have Becton back if I couldn't find a better option. If I can, then we'll move on. But that's really what it comes down to for the club: is can we find a better option? I'm not convinced that can happen overnight. I don't know the rest of their roster, if anybody's available. I know this: they can't sign 40-year-old tackles and expect them to last the whole season either. So I'm sorry, Paul. I'm just pointing out the facts, right? That's a struggle for me. And so I don't know. I guess you could draft one, but I'll be honest, they haven't drafted great either up front. So they've got to find a way to, one, evaluate better, two, value better as a team building aspect alone. And that goes across the board at any position, especially those on offense. I can't imagine anybody else paying Becton, though. So he may fall back in their lap for a reasonable price, but I would still try to upgrade any way I could.
Yeah, see, that's my assessment as well, that I believe, so the Jets are not going to franchise tag Mekhi Becton. They're like, okay, go see the market. The market, every team he visits, I'm doing a lot of pontificating here months out, but teams go, yeah, we'll give you a 1-year prove it deal. 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. He goes to every team. It comes back to the Jets, 1 year prove it. And he's like, you know what? Why not? And he has a very strong relationship, it appears, with Aaron Rodgers. And he made that clear that that's someone he'd want to play with, who obviously he did not get the chance to this year. That again, he comes back, the Jets kind of come back. They both look at each other across the room, shrug their shoulders. Run it back? Okay.
Right. Here's what I'll tell you they'll do logistically. This is how it'll work. They'll sit down in these meetings. They'll list every free agent tackle that's on the street, maybe some others that might be acquirable via trade. They'll have a card on each one of them lined up. They'll take Mekhi Becton's card and fit that in as to where do we draw the line? Who would we rather have than him? And then I would probably do everything I could to get one of those guys. If you can't, all of a sudden that card looks pretty good, at 10 to 2 at night in the bar, that the options aren't what you think, as we go back to our younger days, sometimes the options, it's all about options. So that's where you'll fit him in as all of the options that are out there in free agency before you have to make a decision. We used to do that with every one of our own free agents. We would line them up in our free agent meetings as to where's the line. That's the line of delineation where that player's card is. Anything above that is an upgrade. Anything below that, we can't allow. So sort your plan out based on that.
That's fascinating. Great insight on, again, what actually goes on in those NFL rooms. Now, you've made it clear that you do not believe the Jets are a wide receiver away, and I think most people would agree with you. But one of their supposed plans that they really want to do is get pressure off of Garrett Wilson, who was really by himself this year. A lot of their acquisitions didn't work out. Alan Lazard performed very poorly. Mecole Hardman didn't even really get on the field. So their choices at wide receiver did not really work out last year. So they're going to take another swing. And there's a lot of names to be free agents. I don't know how many of these names are actually going to make it to the market because each of their respective teams could use the franchise tag on them. But some of these names are Mike Evans, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman Jr., Calvin Ridley, Hollywood Brown. When you're making these evaluations on like wide receivers, there's varying ages, productions, and things of that nature. How do you do what you just were talking about putting your guys on the board and then everyone else above them? Because, like, for instance, T. Higgins is young. He's coming off his rookie contract. Okay, that's intriguing, but he's been wildly inconsistent. He doesn't have the production of a Mike Evans who's had 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons. How are you able to separate these guys when you have varying things like age over here and then wild production? And then when is that number? Because Father Time is undefeated.
No doubt about it. I think you start with the criteria of what we're going to do, how are we going to use them. So I want to know from the coaching staff exactly what are we going to do with this X receiver? What are you going to ask him to do? Now, if he has to do everything, then you're leaving it in my court to then set the criteria for the things that I think are most important. 1, can he stretch the defense? 2, can he catch when he's covered? 3, can he get away from man coverage? So it's the detail of the breakdown will probably surprise you. It's going to be very detailed. And that's how you separate all the names from production. It's not easy. It's not good enough to just say this guy was productive. I want to know the exact role and why he was productive and the parts of his skill set that allowed him to be productive, and then find out if we're going to use him in that same fashion. Because if we're not, it's probably not a good match. I want to know first off what we as coaches and as scheme are going to ask. Then we'll set the criteria that will break any ties, and we'll know exactly who the best fit is for us.
Aaron Rodgers is a 4-time NFL MVP, and quarterbacks seem to have a lot of draw and are involved in some of these conversations where you get to speak with the quarterback and include them in those conversations. And my question would be this: Aaron Rodgers' recruiting record last year, it's a little questionable. Alan Lazard didn't really work out. Randall Cobb and Dalvin Cook and some of these names that he wanted the Jets to bring in on his list ended up not panning out. Would that affect you as you go into the next offseason here, where Aaron Rodgers said, if the Jets management wants my help in recruiting, I will 100% help in those realms? But what is that fine line of listening to your quarterback because you want to give him guys he's comfortable and familiar with, but also, you don't want to just follow his list to a T, because that didn't really work out last year with some of those names. It seems like a fine line.
I would take all the help Aaron wants to give us in recruiting. I really don't want any other help in identifying who we're going to recruit. So that's where I would draw the line. I know what we want. I know best what we want. I'll maybe ask him about a particular player if he has an opinion, if I know he's seen the tape to back up his opinion. But I think he's a valued asset without a doubt. And yes, he should be able to recruit anybody. But it's not about the recruiting part. It's about who do we want to recruit. That's the biggest question they have to answer. And so they've got to prioritize their needs and then find the exact fit that they want. And then we'll get Aaron involved to help us sell the Jets and why it's a good fit. So I kind of equate it to college when they have the seniors out on recruiting trips on the weekends when the guys come to make their visit. But those same seniors didn't determine the guys who are coming and how we're going to pick from that list. So I think the door always has to be open for a guy with the perspective that Aaron would have. I think you've got to draw the line in that as evaluators, we're going to probably know better. And there were a lot of us that kind of knew what they were getting with Alan Lazard and some of these other recommendations that Aaron made. So I just think we all have our lanes to stay into, and that may not be Aaron's lane to actually consider himself the GM of the team.
A few things here before we wrap up. I want your honest take, Randy, because that's what you always give. So I'm not sure why I asked for the honest take, as if you've given non-honest takes before. But Aaron Rodgers, he's going to be 40 years of age, or he is 40, and he will be 40 for the majority of next season. He turns 41 in December. What's your take on Aaron Rodgers and this Jets team that are Aaron Rodgers is spewing that he believes the Jets will not only be a playoff team, but a team that can compete for the AFC East, a team that can compete for the Super Bowl. He strongly believes that, and he is 40 coming off of a torn Achilles. What is your take on the outside looking in on this Jets team that is hoping and rallying Jet fans to believe that this could be a year that they can make happen despite what's happened in recent memory?
Yeah, I don't think my take is quite as optimistic as the glass is half full approach, but I understand Jet fans and I understand Aaron wanting that to be the case. I think they have a rebuild deal that's in it's year 5 now of Joe's 6-year contract. So I haven't seen evidence that tells me these guys are a quarterback or one player away. I think the offense is still a scramble at best. You can say that Aaron is going to make all the difference. Maybe he'll make some difference, but he's not going to be able to block for himself. He's not going to be able to run the right routes. He's not going to be able to do a lot of things that we all hope Superman can do. So there's still a work in progress. There were stints when the defense wasn't what it was ranked up to be either, and that got a lot of play as well. I think the defense is good and of playoff caliber. I'm not sure it's of Super Bowl caliber. So I understand the optimism, and we all should be so lucky as to have the Jets fans optimistic approach, and I love it. But
Yeah.
I'm a realist as well, and I just don't think that we're ready for prime time yet to where we're 1 or 2 players away.
And here's my final one here. Garrett Wilson, who's been a standout receiver for the New York Jets since being drafted, the first Jets receiver to start a career, with 2,000-yard campaigns. He's been expressing his frustration very openly, and apparently he vented with Joe Douglas and management at the end of the year about a lot of the things that need to get changed or fixed. And Randy, I always thought the hardest part of your job was making sure you drafted the right guy. Like some people draft a player that ends up being a bust, or someone drafts someone that end up being a success. But the more I've looked at Garrett Wilson as an example, it's not just getting the guy right. It's making sure that you keep the guy happy so that he wants to retain and stay there for the foreseeable future. So there's been some concern among Jets land that if they don't fix and correct this thing quick enough, that Garrett Wilson, despite the fact that it seems like a hit on the pick and the player and everything else, that ultimately at the end of the day, he's going to want out before the Jets have time to truly turn this around. So what is that balance of, again, not only drafting the right guy, but also keeping them happy, engaged, and involved at every level to make sure that the losing and everything else doesn't eventually get to these players where they ultimately want out?
Well, I think at some point you have to respect Garrett's passion, and I totally would be on board with that. I would want his take as much as we can. My guess is and again, I don't know what these conversations were like, but my history tells me when a player comes in to see me about certain things, it's more about the intangibles of the choice and the culture not being what he had hoped it to be. Players don't usually complain about other players if their skill level isn't exactly what they all want, but they do complain about culture. They do complain about work ethic. They do complain about intangible things of others. And that would tell me that we have to make sure as a front office that we have the right kind of guys here. We'll get it if we have the right kind of guys, and other players, especially in your locker room, can judge that and know that. And that's what I think probably more than anything, I would listen to a player and his opinions on is just the fact that we've got to do right by them, is we've got to have the right kind of guys and the right kind of makeup to have others like Garrett Wilson.
All right, Randy, is there anything else Jets related that you've been waiting to get off your chest? Anything we didn't ask you? Anything of Jets land that I see you get to, as you have under your byline there, the Athletic, the football GM, you get a chance to, really, go off on any NFL items of choice and things that, pick up on your radar. Is there anything else Jets related we didn't ask you that you wanted to get off your chest, wanted to provide that platform?
Actually, no, Paul, you guys do an awesome job of covering the Jets. I'm kind of the 30,000-foot guy, right? So from up above looking down. I probably need to drink some more of that Kool-Aid that you guys are selling with regard to the Jets being Super Bowl bound. So I need to wake up and stop being the old man to shoo people off my yard, so to speak, So I need to listen to you more often.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think I've heard that enough from you, Randy, but that's beautiful. We should incorporate that more into the recipe. There's
Yeah.
no question about it. But Randy, I love you, buddy. I love doing our show together. I love still watching you from afar, doing everything that you're doing. So it's always great to catch up after all this time. All the fans appreciate it. I saw it in the comments throughout the entire show live. So, Randy, it means the world, buddy, and we miss you.
My pleasure, Paul. Always good to connect with you and be back in touch. And hopefully we can do it again soon.
All right, we'll do it for the Super Bowl parade. We'll line that
Thank
up
you.
appropriately with Randy Mueller here on the show. All right,
Sign
thanks
me up.
everybody. Yeah, there he is. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Take care.